100 of the 6 route bus system for the Winston-Salem Transit Authority.
So my comments here are in reference to this. So this is an action. This is an action that I requested of staff after our budget conversations, and the action was intended the action was intended to be able to stop the service in an ability for us to review how the route could be better routed to serve the populations along Route 100. My question, though, at this point is just trying to understand where we have been in this process. And that was a question that I had asked a couple weeks back, and I hadn't gotten a response. And so that's what I'm trying to understand.
Yes, sir. Councilmember Montgomery, in order to suspend the services, we have to comply with the public participation process, which means that we have to have public hearings and present that information to the Winston-Salem Worcester Board of Directors. And after their consideration, then we bring it back to City Council for approval to suspend the route.
Right. I'm aware of that piece, but I guess let me rephrase the question in the sense of in the original conversations, it was stated that the timing of the process to suspend a route would be exactly what it has been in terms of how long ago we looked at having a conversation and whether or not it was worth it to suspend the route or just rework the route itself. And so that's what I'm trying to figure out. What have we done?
The route has been running, and we are recommending suspending it effective January 2nd. While it's suspended, we will be working with the various schools and looking at other alternatives than to bring back a recommendation to this committee and council and the Winston-Salem, the Worcester Board for consideration.
Well, to me, just kind of looking at the timing, because part of what we discussed from a budget standpoint was that we would have something that we would be able to discuss with results by the time we're coming back around. And just looking at a timing standpoint, that it doesn't seem feasible that that would be the case. In the sense of if we're suspending the route would be suspended in the 1st of January to derive a new plan of some sort, and then having to see something implemented, and then us moving into a budget conversation where we will be talking about resources, whether or not that makes sense and puts us in a position where we actually have something to discuss, and that you have something that it puts it in a good or bad light because you won't have any evidence of sort. And so that's I'm kind of conflicted in terms of where we've come along with it in this part, and yeah. So
I'm not sure. Councilmember Montgomery, are you requesting that we hold action on this, or are you requesting a longer
because
trial
for
time
to suspend the route, for us to institute a new route because we would take an action to suspend this route would require us to come back to council, correct?
Yes, sir.
If we rework the route and we change the routing system, that is not something that requires a council action.
I don't think so, unless we get the direction from council.
Depending on the scope. If it's a route of similar scope and within the budget that council approved, the answer is no, it would not require council action. If it expanded on the scope of what council has provided in terms of funding, then yes, obviously I have to come back to council.
But that's kind of the point I'm in now, in the sense of we've moved to a place to suspend the route, and that requires additional bureaucratic process, and elected officials engaging in that, and then having to come back around all again for a new route if we implemented something, which in some ways seemed counterintuitive.
Mr. Larson.
Yeah, since this does run through the South Ward, I would definitely share Council Member Montgomery's concerns. My perception was, well, first of all, let me get some of the math straight here. We have 31 routes, is what this report says. And am I to understand that in the 8-month period of evaluation of this program, the average ridership on each of those routes was for 48,000? Is that what we're saying, 48,500?
The average for each
The
route.
average route. And the average on our route that we're discussing tonight was basically 10%.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So there's the problem. Although we've got 4,850 people that are being served by a route right now. And so they're trying to understand then, to say that it's suspended, I was sort of thinking this means it was temporarily suspended, because what we're saying here, I think, or I thought was that we are going to reevaluate the merits in the sense of having to restructure the services provided to these 4,800 people or whatever, and the needs within the South Ward or the Southwest Ward or East Ward rather, and how to serve that audience. And what I'm not hearing in this is the program to address basically services provided by the Route 100 or restructuring the needs within the ward to compensate for the loss of a route. And so if we're just talking about abandoning this route straight out, even though I know it's costing us a lot of money right now, I'm a little nervous about simply saying we are going to cancel it, basically, suspend it. We're using the word suspending. I'd feel a lot better if it said temporarily suspending.
It does.
Where does it say temporarily?
In the resolution.
The resolution. I don't
And in
see
the
it.
resolution, yeah.
All right, well, I'm sorry if that's the case. I need to go then to the action.
The last whereas is, whereas the Winston-Salem Transit Authority Board of Directors recommended the City Council consider a temporary suspension of Route 100.
The one I'm looking at says recommendation for suspension of Route 100 be presented to City Council. Resolution authorizing recommendation for suspension of Route 100 be presented to City Council.
If you'll go on to the
The next one, do we have another one?
go back to the,
Which resolution am I looking at?
Second.
Now therefore recommend the mayor, city council, Winston-Salem hereby recommend authorize proceed with suspension of Route 100.
if you look at the last whereas.
Temporary, so recommend. Well, why do we use second word? Anyway, I am, like I said, I have some reservation about this thing just going with, I hope we can have some further discussion about services provided.
Ms. Bray.
Just to be a little pedantic, 4,850 riders, that's over an 8-month period, right?
4,850 trips,
Trips.
passenger trips,
Trips,
not
right.
riders. Yes.
Exactly, and that was my point. But that's over an 8-month period, divided by 8, divided by 30, it's about 20 a day. So it's not, could be as few as 20 people that are using
Yes.
the route, not 4,850 people.
Right.
And then I'm kind of in agreement with Mr. Montgomery here. If we're going to bring this back and we're not going to be spending more money, why do we have to have council action to tweak the route?
I believe that we were required by federal law,
Pretty good reason.
because of the grant, tell me if I'm mistaken, to act to suspend a route that we approved, or is that not the case?
I'm not sure if it's federal law or if it's just that we need to make sure that the council as a whole has the agreement that this is something that you want done. I was thinking more of the latter, quite frankly, when I insisted that we bring this forward. Because we have had conversations about it, but we've never gotten your approval, if you will.
Okay, so the public hearing process was the federal law requirement.
Yes.
Ms. Carmen, is that, okay?
Right.
Right, and so that was required before the city could suspend it, but it is not required by the federal authorizing
The addition.
authority or the grant terms that the action be reviewed by the council. I have a different point, which is one of the principal substantive contacts that we got from the handful of folks that were involved in the public comment process was that the timing of any suspension or change not hang out to dry people who signed up for classes at Forsyth Tech main campus, depending on this transportation. So as a practical matter, if we don't authorize suspension this month, I would oppose suspending it anytime during the first half of the year in 2018. So if that affects your thinking, Mr. Montgomery, on what your recommendation would be.
My recommendation would be not to suspend the route at all. The original intention of asking and talking to staff about suspending the route was that there would be some cost savings, that if we stopped the route early enough, reworked the route, if there was a need to do something different distances, there would have been cost savings in not having the route run, that you could achieve what you want to do within the what was set. At this point in time, I don't believe that could be done with looking at who are likely the larger users to rework the route around, because of when those individuals would be utilizing the route. And so because of that was the reason I'm not sure at this point it makes sense to rework the suspended at this point, because I don't know if we'd achieve much cost savings at all.
Have we budgeted any cost savings when we originally budgeted this?
No.
It was budgeted for the full amount, for the full year, and we were going to see if we could generate some cost savings based on evaluation. And if we don't take action today, then it'll come up in next year's budget deliberations as to whether to carry it forward, which is off the semester cycle, I think, that you were talking about.
Wouldn't we have to go through the public hearing process again?
If you took no action today, there's nothing that
Right.
you would have to have public discussion on in the future. The
What-
route stays the same.
What you could do is take no action and then direct staff to expeditiously work with the university and the council members to come up with some route changes that could be done administratively. I think that was the whole intent of Council Montgomery was, let's fix it, but if we can save a little money while we're fixing it. But if you suspend it, I understand, then we got to go back through the whole
That's it.
route setting process, and we won't have a new route running until probably late spring
Yes.
at the earliest.
Okay, I think the principal reason this was raised and pressed during the budget process, or during the earlier decision-making round on the route revisions and the additional route, was that this appeared to be an all but unused route compared to the other routes that we're running. It is a cross-town route. It goes, in essence, from between the Forsyth Tech main campus, so it impacts my ward as well, to the Union Station, and has stops that, in theory, are intended to serve students at Winston-Salem State and other locations. It has not yet caught on, and the question that was raised, I think reasonably, was whether there is really a ridership base in potential for this. And I'm not sure that there has been any research on that question actually completed. What more would we do to examine that question?
Mr. Bessie, I'm not sure what you mean by the ridership base.
I don't, as an advocate for a robust public transit system, but who appreciates the need not to toss money down the drain. I'm not necessarily committed to retaining this route if it's not going to be used. So I don't start from the basis of I just want to rework where it runs. I want to see whether there is a potential demand, a user base, that can be established by either re-advertising or reworking it.
Right, and I don't know, from a staff standpoint, I'm not certain that, again, that answer's been done, that question's been answered. What I have done, and the reason even having this conversation was around the fact of the anchors who are there. I've had a meeting that was called by one of the members of the Winston board, Mr. Trey Cotton, who's also a vice chancellor at Winston-Salem State, who brought together his counterparts at both the School of the Arts and Salem College to have a conversation. And all the universities stated very clearly that they saw that there was an opportunity for them to be able to leverage what they were doing already from a transportation standpoint into a system, but they didn't know what that meant. And that led to the conversations around whether or not we paused this system to be able to understand what that was.
What did they commit to doing on ongoing basis to review the issue of whether there is a demand base, and if so, how to activate it?
Well, from the university side, that is something in terms of that there has not been an engagement yet with full staff and those same individuals. One of the opportunities that exists is some of the dollars that are spent by the institutions today for distance travel for their students. How the thought is how those dollars could be invested into a system that leverages city dollars and institutional dollars to be able to make something that actually works. And I think the user base is built in because you have concentration of over 1,000 individuals who live on the campus and over 2,500 folks who are on the campus every single day who provide an opportunity at one institution and then the same thing at two others within close proximity. And so the commitment from them was being a part of the conversation to figure out how and if this is something that worked for them. And that was a commitment from those individuals at the institution.
What time frame?
The original time frame was what we discussed in the budgeting, and that's why in terms of where we are right now in terms of this piece of suspending this action seems to be within the time frame in the wrong space. That the conversations with the university personnel and representatives from the university personnel and the staff should have been something that we did before, if we were going to, when we got to the timing place right now of suspending, that should have been something that had already taken place.
I think the original anticipation was that it would have been done by now, but, so.
I concur.
I'd like to ask, as I look at this route and thought a little bit about it, as to why we stop it at Forsyth Tech and we don't run it out to the mall.
It was,
I mean, I wasn't in these deliberations, but a lot of students the buses have to run out to the mall from universities currently. And it seems to me, what is the destination base? We talk about developing uses and functions and where people go.
so the destination was to really connect the universities. And so at the time, it did not appear that we could get the extended to the mall. When we began looking at this route, and even when we first began talking about suspending the services, one of the considerations we discussed was extending it because we do have the time in the route to extend it to the mall. And we were given direction to not make any changes, go ahead and proceed with suspending the service. But we could not suspend it. If we couldn't just stop the service, we actually had to then go through the public participation process, which requires us to advertise for 30 days. Well, one, get an action, and then advertise for 30 days, then have the public hearings, and then get another action from the board, and now here to Public Works
Well, see, what
Committee.
I'm trying to understand,
So,
I'm trying to understand if we're redesigning it, if it's not functioning well, and we're looking at what constituencies and how we serve them, and you're just shuffling students back from Forsyth Tech to Winston-Salem State, picking up some students in Salem College, wherever along the way, School of the Arts. But we got a body of people that go to the mall. A lot of people. And it seems to me that if the universities are running their buses out, there's a conversation to be had with the universities as to whether our bus service should provide that service to their universities. I mean, we're running buses on Wake Forest campus right now. So, I'm sort of curious as to whether, if we're gonna extend this, if we're gonna revisit this in the next few months, and come back again and have conversations with the institutions along the way, particularly now that we're getting Ram Bridge opened up again and the connectivity of all of this traffic flow is changing radically. If we shouldn't be asking, is this, if we got the time particularly, is this route, tweaking this route in some way or another going to actually improve the ridership?
And when we instituted the routes in the beginning, we did have conversations with the universities, and the conversations that we had is what led us to where we are. Wake Forest indicated that they were not interested in our system taking over their transportation system. Winston-Salem State did express some interest, but they wanted, in the School of the Arts and Salem College all said they wanted to see what could happen, and so we created a route that connected the schools because that was the larger area of interest. As we began, again, looking at how this route was not successful, we did look at extending it to the mall, but we were told not to make any changes because we were considering suspending it so that we could further the conversation with the schools.
Was that council directed not to look at extending it? Who directed you not to look at that? Who, at that point?
Not to make any changes to the route.
Not to look at expanding the distance.
It was an understanding, it was a council directive because we were asked to suspend the service.
From council?
But we couldn't.
Individual council members, I think, was where we're getting feedback, which is why we're actually here today, is
Good. I mean,
a
exactly.
directive from the full council,
Right.
from the full board.
Okay, so I would like, maybe you council members, first of all, I'm not prepared to kill the route tonight, particularly. Temporary suspension, if you want to call it that, but maybe not. I think there's something else to be done here. I still think there's another piece of work. As important as these institutions are, as important as the schools and those students are, and with the transportation challenges that students have, I hate to start just writing it off, but I got to also ask, where do the students want to go? And that's something our transportation system should be asking. Do they want to go downtown? Do they want to go to the mall? And how do we get them there?
Let me follow up on that point. The East Mall Circulator is another one of our lowest ridership routes in the city. Are you saying that you would have the time to extend this route west to the mall within the half-hour time frame?
This particular route went on 100, yes, sir. That's what we were able to assess.
It might be worth looking at the potential to combine those two routes. Mr. Montgomery?
Well, I just listening to the conversation today, there's new revelations as you keep hearing and listening. But to have been engaged in the conversation thus far, and I am, unless I was not in this room when we made the decision as a council on leaving this route in the budget, I thought it was profoundly clear the intention of why it was left in the budget at that time. And if not, I think it would have been stricken out of the budget if that was that was the will of the council not to examine, and then to have an attempt to reevaluate the route itself in a way, and that process seemingly impacted by different perspectives of folks who had not been engaged in those conversations, I think is problematic.
Mr. Keller?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'd like to make a suggestion. I think one way to reach diplomacy, we could discuss how we got here, we can discuss where we're going, but I think it might be prudent that this item stay in committee until the December meeting, and at that particular time, give all of the stakeholders, including those who are on this committee, staff who are in this room, and the stakeholders from the university, see if we can get them together for a conversation to determine how we move forward. I think at this point in time, we're sort of belaboring the hour, and though there are excellent suggestions on the table, we still haven't moved forward with the resolution. But tonight, do we suspend the route? Do we hold it, look for other solutions? And I think the answer is yes. But I would say December would be a good amount of time for the stakeholders to get together and make a decision.
And normally I would agree that holding it in committee another month is the better course to take. In this case, because there's a 30-day notice required, which would have it running into, if we don't act before the end of November, we'll have it running into January and risking another semester's worth of, planning commitment by a relatively small user base. So I can tell you that if we don't move this forward this month, I will not support moving it forward until mid-year next year. Now, I'm not the one who was asking that the suspension be implemented. So, I'm not the one coming from that perspective. But in terms of the time impacts on the rider base, such as it is, I think that we're in a position where we either need to act or we need to determine that we're not going to act for another half year. Naturally, that's just one vote in the process as well. But I thought I should be candid that if we don't move it forward now, I will oppose moving it forward later, until later in the year. So,
Mr. Chairman, what I'm hearing is a consensus that you don't really want to suspend it.
I think there's a majority position on the committee.
If I'm hearing the committee members correctly, at this point in time, there's not a desire to suspend it as there was at a previous period in time.
However, I do think we need to evaluate the efficiency of the route and its destination.
Absolutely.
And spend some time in conversation with the stakeholders, which are major institutions, and see if there's not a way to ramp up the justification for this route. I understand the argument of cost efficiency here, but I also think that we haven't quite hit the stride that we thought we were going to hit with this, in part because of the limitations we put on the route. So if we could, as we reevaluate this now, when do we look at it again, though, if we're going to do that? I mean, I'm not opposed to coming back and looking at it again after we've made another effort. Is that at the end of the year?
I would suggest that the stakeholders would get together in the next month or two and bring back to this committee to look at informally some suggested changes to the route.
Ramp it up.
And I would ask that included in that review be the potential to combine the two relatively low ridership routes for efficiency's sake.
Good.
I hear a consensus not to move this forward. Hold the issue in committee. If there's no objection, we'll do that. Okay, then let's go to item G1, please. This is. Go ahead, please.
Item G1, information regarding street sweeping audit, costing, and supplemental service provisions.
All right, so this is an information item, I believe, at this point.
Good evening, Chairman Bessie, members of the committee, and council.
Good evening.
Good evening. For the purpose of anyone watching us at this late hour, if you would identify yourself.
My name is Scott Tesh. I'm a director of the Office of Performance and Accountability for the city.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. So the information item we have for you this evening has 3 parts. The first part is a report on street sweeping contract conducted by the city's internal audit division, so an audit of the street sweeping contract. The second piece is a costing analysis of potentially bringing street sweeping service in-house, and the third piece looks at a supplementation pilot of street sweeping services currently being handled by the city's sanitation department. So the first piece here, the contract audit, the Sweeping Corporation of America Incorporated is the current contractor and was the contractor in the most recent period as well. The Internal Audit Division looked at a period from January 1, 2017 through June 30th. To look at the scope of the audit included verifying proper invoicing, checking invoices against daily reports and GPS monitoring system information, verifying the timeliness of service provision, and also reviewing city contract administration. The report is attached, and if you look at the findings of the report, you'll see that many of the contract provisions were satisfied. However, the audit yielded findings showing that the GPS monitoring systems on several of the vehicles were not operating correctly. Some of the historical GPS data was unobtainable or did not match the daily reports provided by the contractor, and also that some of their vehicles were traveling a little bit above the mandated 10-mile-per-hour speed limit. There were a few other smaller findings related to they may have been a couple hours outside of the route scheduling, or they didn't get something to us by 8:30 in the morning the next day. Daily reports are due at 8:30. Maybe they came in at 10:30. But the major findings were related to GPS and the daily reports. The Internal Audit Division noted insufficient verification of contract provisions by city staff, recommended that they verify those routes with GPS monitoring, and then also document whenever they do physical monitoring of those routes. So that's a quick summary of the contract audit itself. If you guys have any questions, I'd be more than happy to entertain those. Otherwise, I'll move on to the service costing piece.
Questions? Yes.
The timing on the GPS deal, has that been corrected? Have we had any time to see, how that's been re-implemented?
I would have to look to Tanika on that one.
Yes, the GPS system has been corrected, and our staff is now using the GPS system along with the daily reports to verify locations.
Thank you.
The second piece of the information item is a service costing. So we were asked to look at potentially providing this with city resources. I'll draw your attention to the table on the second page of the information item. What staff has put forward is essentially providing a service in-house with 2 new positions, 2 senior equipment operators, and we would purchase 3 vehicles, 2 frontline and 1 backup. The table here shows the contractor's current cost, annualized roughly $340,000 a year. They sweep just under 5,900 miles of streets at a cost per mile of roughly $58. The city-provided service, you'll see that there's a first-year and a 10-year cost because we would NCMLC the vehicles over 5 years. We've shown what you would have to add to the budget next year, but then...
Can you go back and just explain that acronym?
Okay, sorry, North Carolina Municipal Leasing. It's our financing source for city vehicles. Thank you, sir. So you see there that there's a $56,000 difference in providing the service in the first year, but over the course of 10 years, we would actually show that it would be $200,000 cheaper for us to provide the service in that model with 2 positions and the 3 vehicles. We would also sweep roughly 13,000 miles, or more than double what the contractor is providing under this scenario, giving us a much more efficient service. As you see down there at the bottom, for the 10-year average cost per mile at roughly $25 or 60% less than the contractor's price. This is just the incremental cost of the service, what we would add to the budget. This is not a full costing that includes overhead and administration and that kind of thing. The supervision of this service would be handled with current capacity, current resources, and so that's part of the reason that it comes in so much cheaper than the contractor's price. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions you have there. Otherwise, I believe staff would recommend that this piece of the item be extracted and go back to Finance Committee for review to talk about the logistics of potentially doing this and including it in the future budget process.
Questions at this point? Yes.
So these costs include current city staff or adding bodies?
2 new bodies.
2 new bodies?
Yeah.
Okay.
Drive the trucks.
And it takes into account retirement, health benefits, and all that stuff?
Yeah, it's the salary and benefits for 2 new positions, as well as all of the direct costs of the vehicles, tipping fees, fuel, maintenance, all that kind of stuff.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
We did have one member of the public signed up to speak, Amy Easter. Ms. Easter, if you'd step forward and give us, for the record, your name and address, and sort of briefly give us your comments, please.
Yes, Amy Easter. I live at 3407 Luther Street. I'll be very quickly. I represent the Winston-Salem Cycling Advocacy Network, or Winston-Salem CAN, which is a group of bicycle advocates here. On behalf of all those members, I wanted to first thank City Manager Lee Garrity for initiating this audit. Also, Mr. Scott Tesh and his team for running this audit, which was really well done. And then Ms. Tanique McCullough and Johnny Taylor for meeting with me to talk to me, answer questions, and talk about this process. A lot of our members had actually raised a lot of concerns about debris in the bike lanes and how that's a significant safety hazard to riders. and also a barrier to people who don't think the infrastructure is safe or suitable for riding. So we're very happy to see this audit was done. Seems to me like a no-brainer that would be a positive step to bring it in-house. I would like to take a little moment to just emphasize the need to make sure that the on-street bicycle lanes are emphasized. I mean, it's good that we're increasing the amount of mileage that would be swept. I'd like to make sure we consider those bike lanes as a priority, because the debris in that piece of the roadway is very dangerous, more so than to a motorist. And then that was pretty much it. Just big thank you. Everybody that I worked with throughout the process was wonderful, and I appreciate everyone's efforts to look into this and improve the quality of our roads for all users. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Easter. Mr. McDowell.
I just want to do a quick shout out to Amy and Jake for bringing this forward, because this probably would not have happened without their advocacy and asking us to take a look at this situation. So thank you very much for that.
I think that's correct. Comments? Yes, sir.
Chairman, there is a third piece that I want to address very quickly.
Please go. I'm sorry. I misunderstood. I thought you were finished.
Oh, sorry. Currently, the City Sanitation Division is using some vehicles to clean some of the bike lanes that Ms. Easter was speaking about. What staff is recommending is that if we bring the service in-house, that we would use the new staff and vehicles to continue that as part of the street sweeping service. Going forward, that we would discontinue the pilot program that we have with the other sanitation vehicles, but we would continue to do those miles as part of the new service.
Very good. Thank you. In the interest of time, does anyone disagree that there would be a consensus to prepare a report for finance on this item, given the increased efficiency that it appears likely that we would get by bringing this in-house?
I think that's where the rubber hits the road in finance, and making sure salaries, for example, for these two employees are going to be, competitive as we look at adding salaries, operating costs, inflation, over a 10-year period, maintenance of trucks, all of that factors have been accounted for. I think the other issue that will come up will be allocation of this resource within the city streets, within the different wards. And I know certain wards think they have greater demands than other wards. And I think one of the questions that needs to be sort of answered is how the determination will be made, considering we're going to be adding cleaning areas, how we're going to allocate this resource to cover a very large city. I'd like to think about that. That's a bigger issue. It exists whether it's privately contracted or whether we take it in-house. But it looks like we're getting the opportunity to expand services, and I'd like to make sure it's equitably distributed in the city.
Yes, sir.
And I think that the more than doubles annual miles swept is a key statistic here. Okay. Any objection to that? All right, then.
No.
Thank you for the report, the study, and let's move forward with getting this financed for consideration. Yes.
I just wanted to say, Mr. Chairman, that I've been very impressed with this audit. Is looking both at deficiencies that we had internally in managing this project, as well as with the contractor. And I've talked to staff about the potential of looking at doing other services like recycling, as well as some of the others, mowing, where I think there could be some other significant returns like this. So,
Very good point. Thank you for raising that for the public's information. Yes.
Does this fall under Mr. Taylor's responsibilities now, since he's here? You looking forward to this? Yeah. Okay.
it will.
It'll be in good hands.
It'll be in good hands. Right.
We have great confidence in Mr. Taylor's.
Excellent.
Okay, let's move to item G2, please.
Item G2, petition to close and abandon a portion of Viceroy Drive. Petition of Neil Kettner.
All right, let's begin with the staff report, and then we will hear from Ms. St. Clair, I believe I'm speaking on behalf of the petitioner.
Mr. Chairman, this is a portion of a roadway that staff has reviewed. As you recall, you have a process for considering the closure of both open and unopened streets and alleyways. Many times, most times when you see an item, it's a recommendation from staff that it be closed because it's gone through the process. and we find that the request is appropriate and does not create problems. In this situation, the planning board staff, the transportation staff, and other departments have identified that this closure would create less connectiveness for the roadway system, and therefore staff is recommending against the request to close, and we'll be happy to answer any questions.
All right, any questions for Mr. Turner before we hear from the petitioner? All right, thank you. Go ahead.
This is a divided road right now by private property, right?
I'm sorry?
This is a divided road. It's broken into two sections, and it's split by a private ownership piece of land. Is that the way I looked at, looking at the maps? So the section that's being abandoned and then there's an open area on private property, and then the road picks up again at the south end of that property.
There's a public road to the north.
Right,
And then it connects up to a private system to the south.
And there's a private driveway at the end of that public road currently. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then south of that private driveway, there's another piece of property. Is there?
Correct.
And then the road picks up again.
Yes.
So the division that occurs there is private property unless the city wants to go in and acquire a right-of-way. Those roads are not connected currently.
They are just not accepted by the city for maintenance. There's a driveway
There's a
system.
driveway all the way through currently?
I believe so.
Oh, I didn't.
Not all the way through.
I didn't see that. I see a
Maybe off
driveway.
the map, but I'll check and see.
In looking at the aerial view, it looked to me like, unfortunately, the view that we have does not show the southern section. It carries it into the, whatever it is, Cups and Saucers property. And then in looking at a larger view, as I recall, there is a driveway, part of, I guess, Viceroy Drive further south, but it's interrupted. And what I'm hearing staff saying is that the potential of connecting those roads, north and south, which would run basically parallel to Hope Church Road, would be precluded by the blocking off of this section of Viceroy Road or Drive in that one section.
Correct.
And it would also eliminate the driveway access for the Cup and Saucer property that currently exists on that road that leads into the Cup and Saucer property.
I believe that's correct as well.
So there's they have a right of way. Okay.
All right, any other questions for Mr. Turner at this point? All right, then let's hear, I believe, Ms. St. Clair. If you would come and identify yourself and your address for the record and whom you're representing, and give us your comments, please.
Sure. Good evening. Pam St. Clair. The business address is 200 Regent Drive. Neil Kettner and I purchased this business property 14 years ago. And this road, that portion of road we're speaking of, actually was gravel when we purchased the property. And when we were given permission to occupy this particular 200 Regent Drive, I was told that the state abandoned the right-of-way back in 1992 because at one time they had planned to connect the two business parks. So that was abandoned in 1992. And I was told by city office then that normally what happens is the two businesses end up with like half and half of that, I call it a service road, which would then Clark Powell was right beside us. And then we came to the point where we needed to expand and build some warehouse space for internet sales. So we started the process through the city office and then determined, actually I gave you the document, the city did not have this abandonment by the state that I was given a long time ago by Fred that still works in the city. And we learned that it didn't automatically happen and that we needed to start this process to officially close the road. What we want, the main reason it's so important to us is because if we don't get this official closure, then the building, the warehouse building, will need to be 4 feet smaller because of the city setback requirements. Right now, I call it a service road. Someday, somebody just showed up and paved it. a few years ago, that gravelled area. When you go to the end of this service road, I call it, there's a fence. So it's not actively used, and it hasn't been used in 14 years. There is a portion of road that goes to Clark Powell to the back of their building. UPS, FedEx delivers there daily, and some of their employees will park their service vans there. By closing this road officially, it's only really a semantic because it will not restrict usage of the road as it's being used today. Now, the property south behind that fence, and you're correct, there is a portion of land. It's like there's the fence, and then way on further south, if you could jump over it, then you would end up at the other business park. But that has been in place for 25 years, actually since the abandonment, because that road has not been a thorough, they did not complete that. So from our perspective, business as it's been occurring for 14 years would not change just because it's officially closed. Because it wouldn't prevent anybody from using it that's using it today at all. It only allows us to have a warehouse space 4 feet larger.
Have you explored the variance process for the setback?
For the warehouse.
The grievance process about the
Variance,
setback.
I'm sorry, variance process.
You get a variance.
Or the variance. We have been working with Bucky, and he was the one that and Charles, and both of them suggested that we do what we're doing right now, because he said that would really help us with the setback.
Yeah. What we're dealing with here is that the planning and transportation staffs are recommending against this because they still see it as desirable in the long term to close the gap on the two halves of the road for a public utility and safety standpoint.
I saw that was one issue, but it seemed like the others seemed to be, but the others that were listed really wouldn't be reality because nobody is prevented now, and it wouldn't change just because it was officially closed. And there literally is a gate. Nobody can pass through to that parking lot unless somebody opens the gate. So it does not stay open, it stays closed. That area right there from the fence down to the edge of our property, it's used now. A 18-wheeler parks there and uses it for a parking lot, and he'll come get it as he needs to use it. It's become a haven for stolen vehicles. We just had one a few months ago that, fortunately, I had worked with a policeman in the city as a customer, and I called him and I said, I'm concerned this might be stolen, and he told me what to do. So it really was, because a policeman showed up with a woman and it all of a sudden left, so I'm sure she had the keys to it. So for some reason, that little stretch of road is used for those type of things, more so than business.
Okay, Mr. Taylor.
Just a question.
Sure.
Ms. St. Clair, who's in charge of the gate? And you mentioned it being open and closed at times. Who does that?
It's not open, that's the thing. It always stays closed. And sometimes we just see a truck parked sideways, like perpendicular really to that fence. So it's not actively used to that parking lot that you're referring to on the other side, which I guess is Trimark.
Yeah, I think what you're saying, Ms. St. Clair, is that the Cup and Saucer Properties folks down here are not particularly active about using that driveway, and I appreciate that point. The concern from planning and transportation was not that existing use so much as the potential future use. Mr. Larson.
Yeah, I do have some concerns about, and it's not in South Ward, but I do have some concerns. What I'm hearing you say is, you want to take it off city roll so that you can get a variance, or you don't even have to get a variance, that you can place your warehouse where you want to place it. And
no, it'll be placed the same place. It's just the size needs to
the size. And so, basically what you're doing is privatizing the road, is what it sounds like. You say you're not going to take the road up. It's going to look exactly the same. You can use it as anybody's used it before. The trouble is, it's not a public right-of-way anymore. It's a private street. And it does have city utilities, and it has other things involved in that particular property. And not only that is, right now, access to the Cup and Saucer, whatever, group below, has a right on that road to access their property. And I haven't heard from them. I don't know what their opinions are on this, as to whether they get a chunk of this land. When you close it, half the property goes to you and half goes to the other people. And depending on what your neighbor wants to do, they can tear up the asphalt on that road. And there's no requirement that remain an open corridor, because you'll only control half of it. And your intent is basically to do a warehouse enlargement. Have you talked to people in planning at all about this?
We have, and they're the ones that suggested that we go through the process and pay the fee to do this process. I mean, that's how we learned about this, and we were advised to do this.
I believe you're talking about the planning inspection step, right?
Within the city office personnel, because they've been involved at the beginning of this.
Fry, or are you talking about zoning? Are you talking about who in planning did you actually?
Well, I might not. I just know city, so it was Becky,
Okay.
and
Right.
Also with Charles has been involved with this too.
Yeah, I think, I know who you're talking about.
Okay,
and
good.
It may technically be within the planning department now, but it's kind of a different branch that handles different things. I'm sorry you got the conflicting opinions. Mr. McIntosh?
Can I offer what might be a have your cake and eat it too conversation here? If the property were closed, and as you're requesting, and an easement granted across it to the Cup and Saucer people, that would be a recorded easement in perpetuity, and a road maintenance agreement, so that their actual usage of that access would not be impinged. Because what that gives them is the ability to subdivide this property and have a separate owner buy that back portion. And losing that access way, it probably has a fairly significant financial impact to them. But if they have an agreement in place to be able to access that, could that solve the problem?
It might solve the property to the south issue, but it wouldn't resolve the
If they own the property, though, does it set back? Where's it set back from? The property line or from the roadway agreement? It would be a private road at that point.
I hear what you're saying, and the problem is that doesn't resolve the longer-term interest to maintain the potential of cutting the road through. This is in the Southwest Ward. In respect to folks' time, I'm not comfortable recommending that we move forward to public hearing at this stage. I'd like to hold this in committee for a month and see if we can get the various staff elements together to talk about the potential for that easement variance, not easement, the variance process, because I don't want to hold up the warehouse expansion on a minor resolvable point, but I'm not convinced this is the best way to go about resolving. Can we do that?
There are other options, and I think it's prudent to explore them.
So that would hold it in committee, and it could come back to our December meeting. And I believe that December 12th is the date. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, one of the things to be aware of is the Zoning Board of Adjustment, if that's the process they're going to be pursuing, may not meet before your next meeting. So we have to come back to you with information on the process, but just be aware that it may not be resolved by that.
Information on the process and the prospects. I mean, let's take a look at whether this is the kind of thing that could be routinely granted, and not something that their response is going to be, we can't do that. There's no legal way to do that. Let's look at other approaches that would resolve the issue without abandoning the future potential for the road there.
One question.
Yes.
St. Clair, is the ability to build your warehouse time sensitive? Is there something you need to get done? I knew you would say that, but is there something that you need to get done?
It's already later than we had hoped.
So if it's something that, was pushed off a couple of months, it wouldn't hurt your timeline. Because it sounds like the committee is willing to work with you, but we don't want to step in your way either. But if there are other options, I think we should explore them. So I just wanted to check with you on time.
The sooner the better, because we had hoped to already be in this building, the warehouse by now. So, every week that we keep delaying is a concern. I'm just being honest.
And I appreciate that. Yeah, I understand.
The closing of the street, the abandonment of the street is not a quick process, is it? I mean, there's a couple of months maybe involved in that.
The advertising, I've been told, yes. You have 30 days, you post, you advertise, you post a sign in the yard, kind of thing.
I think if we can get a waiver or, some sort of agreement with planning board, and at least understand that'd be most expeditious. I think we have that conversation with planning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nicklip. And we'll follow up on this. We'll follow up. Then that stays in committee, and we're asking staff to get together with petitioner on this. That brings us to item G3. This is an information item. What's the pleasure of the committee? It's late in the day.
Yes, late in the day. This is an item of great interest to me personally, and to a lot of my constituents in the older neighborhoods, but I'm perfectly happy to defer this for another month or so.
And we did receive, if I may, some correspondence via email of some citizens maybe asking us to hold off and have a conversation at a later date. So I think if we moved it to December or another committee meeting, that would be good for all parties.
Not time sensitive.
Not time sensitive at all.
All right, then let's move this to December as well, and let all interested parties know that it's been moved to December 12th. Right. Okay. And thank you very much. That does complete the scheduled agenda, and I always ask Mr. Turner this question. Do we have anything else?
I'm sure we know what he's going to say.
No. Very good. Then we are adjourned, and the committee will meet again December 12th. Thank you.
Greg, Viceroy is a state road?